Dear participants, dear colleagues, welcome to today's launch of the competition called Strengthening the Advocacy Services of Investment Promotion Agencies, organized jointly by the World Association of Investment Promotion Agencies and the World Bank Group. The two organizations joined forces for this competition that seeks to recognize those IPAs where effective advocacy efforts led to the adoption of reforms that improve the investment ecosystem. In this launch that is foreseen to last an hour, you will receive background information on the competition. You will hear from two IPAs that will share successful advocacy efforts, as well as how you as an IPA can then submit your cases. We will start with two introductory remarks by WAIPA CEO Boštjan Skala and by World Bank Group Practice Manager Christine Jiang. These introductory words will be followed by an intervention by World Bank Group Senior Private Specialist and Investment Promotion Workstream Leader Armando Heilbronn. After that, we will have the pleasure to listen to two brief presentations of best practice case studies, one by Dushyant Thakur, Vice President of Invest India, as well as by Vanessa Gibson, Director Investment Climate of CINDE. Subsequent to that, we will have the launch of the competition by showcasing the submission platform and how quickly demonstrating how easy it works by World Bank's Alexandra Minku and by WAIPA's Ahmed Omic. And finally, we'll have concluding remarks by World Bank Group Investment Policy and Promotion Global Lead Ivan Nimat. Not to take too much of the time of the presenters, I would now like to introduce the CEO of WAIPA, Boštjan Skala, for his introductory remarks.
Thank you so much, Andreas, and thank you all for joining us today. I would say that we are very excited. We believe that this is time for IPAs to step forward, and I would like to thank first that to World Bank Group to be together in this initiative that we believe is really an important one in these unprecedented times. I would say that it was a very difficult year for IPAs and also a crucial year. Difficult because of the sudden pandemic and they also had to switch strategies. They need to revisit their strategies. It was crucial because many have provided invaluable assistance to their governments and stakeholders in different manners. We have gathered a large number of these best practice examples, especially in the COVID platform that we created to assist IPAs and other, let's say, stakeholders being negatively impacted with the COVID. Once again, we have seen that IPAs can really make the difference and in some cases really contribute to the creation of the right ecosystems. It's very obvious that no one can be alone in this fight. So IPAs should be part of the game and should be able to assist their respective governments in creation of, let's say, better ecosystem, better investment climate. And to achieve this, of course, there is a need for some certain reforms. And that's why this advocacy function of the IPAs come in the forefront. So to track this and to work at the work that IPAs are doing, we published earlier this year, and I'm sure you are all aware, our common survey in partnership with the World Bank Group on the state of IPAs currently, and also there was an addition on the COVID as well. And this gave us, of course, a valuable further insight of the work of IPAs and their challenges. We as WAIPA, of course, we focus on equipping our members with the right skills to promote, attract, and facilitate FDI. And I'm happy to say that despite the pandemic, we were able to offer our members really a large array of capacity building programs, which will help them later to elaborate and to help to their governments and to investors. IPAs will be critical, I must say again, in the economy recovery or building back better. So with this competition, let's say on the advocacy, we want to highlight the important function, of course, that advocacy brings to changing the ecosystems and adopting to the new reality or the new normal, if it's called many times. And I believe advocacy is a function that is sometimes overlooked, but indeed is very effective. because if IPAs cannot transfer the message that the investors, which are the mostly negatively infected and having hurdles, if they can't feed back their governments, then of course we can't imagine appropriate reforms that are needed to overcome these difficulties. And we would like to highlight, of course, best cases from you that you will apply for it. It's not all about awards. Of course, the winners and the others who will get awards will be the happiest one, but the idea is to bring the notion to the global FDI community, to give, let's say, best practices and to showcase to others as well who might not be aware of how important advocacy is, might not have resources to be able to perform in changing the investment climate environment, or their voices are not heard enough from their governments. So we believe that this will definitely encourage also other IPAs and the global community to be going into the direction of the reforms. And this will be essential actually for what we would like to achieve with this. So I don't want to take so much of your time. So I would like to hand over to Christine also to share her views as our partner in this project. So thank you very much, Christine. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Baochang. And I also would like to thank all the IPA colleagues who have joined us today around the world. And first of all, I want to mention that the bank group appreciates the excellent partnership and collaboration with WAIPA and its members, a relationship that has already generated a large number of valuable synergies, including the IPA surveys, Baochang, you just mentioned, to amplify WAIPA's voices, and also the peer-to-peer sharing sessions that we co-organized in response to the COVID-19 outbreak. This new joint initiative of IPA Advocacy Contest will further strengthen our important partnership. The economic crisis generated by the COVID-19 pandemic led to a significant contraction in FDI flows globally, putting a considerable strain on the global economic outlooks. That means indeed that it has become increasingly challenging to attract and retain investors everywhere in our developing regions. Precisely now, many governments realize that IPAs play an instrumental role in attracting and retaining FDI, not just by promoting their own countries as investment destination, but also by channeling information towards their own governments to help them strengthen the investment strategies and improve business environment for investors. IPAs have first-hand intelligence to identify needed reforms and can advocate to policymakers for the benefits of all investors. Our recently published Global Investment Competitiveness Report highlighted that for a long time, IPAs have been considered intermediaries between investors and host country governments. Direct investor feedback collected by our IPAs can be extremely useful to influence policymaking. According to our global survey with thousands of executives of multinational companies, advocacy is among the most appreciated IPA services by investors during the establishment, retention, and expansion stages. At the same time, recent joint research by WAIPA and the World Bank Group found out that only 3/4 of IPAs include policy advocacy as part of their mandates, and 35% of which recognize that they have not been successful to engage in advocacy activities. Another World Bank Group study shows that despite the tremendous value that investors attach to IPA advocacy services, on average, only 5% of their budgets are allocated towards these activities. So with this WAIPA World Bank Group Advocacy Contest, we are hoping to encourage the development of policy advocacy by IPAs which would include 3 key factors. The first one is understanding the issues investors have. Second one, advocating on their behalf. And the third, influencing stakeholders to improve the investment climate so investors can operate more efficiently and smoothly. Although advocacy efforts can be complex, they ultimately contribute to a structured and sequenced plan to influence decision makers to address investor concerns. For the World Bank Group, one of our key mandates is precisely to advocate for structural reforms to improve the investment ecosystem in our client countries. We have teams that rely on extensive analysis and operational experiences to identify market failures and policy failures and propose reform recommendations based on international good practices. Our work focuses on sharing cross-country data and knowledge in order to give our counterparts, including many of you, our IPAs, all the necessary tools to improve the investment climate and attract more investment in their countries. And we hope that the advocacy contest will inspire IPAs and share with each other on how to best advocate for important investment reforms. Just to conclude, for Chang and myself, we would really like to invite you to actively participate in this contest, to tell your own stories about successful reforms that your agency advocated for, while learning from other agencies and international development partners of the tools and practices that you can use to strengthen this particular function and support your government in attracting and retaining FDI in these very difficult times. Of course, these reforms will also be critical for robust economic recovery and long-term economic development. Many thanks. Back to you, maybe Andreas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine and Bostian, for these introductory remarks. We will now move to the next stage of the launch. That will be an intervention by Armando Helborn, who many of you know, who is the World Bank Group Senior Private Specialist and Investment Promotion Workstream Leader. This will last roughly 10 minutes. After that, we'll hear from the 2 IPA case studies. So the floor is yours, Armando.
Thank you, Andreas, Bostian, Christine, dear participants. I am really delighted to be here today. Part of this joint WAIPA World Bank Group team launching the 2021 awards for strengthening IPA advocacy services. Since we're talking about awards, let me start by congratulating the Estonian Investment Agency, Invest India, the Rwanda Development Board, and CINDE Costa Rica for winning this year's UN awards. Very well done, very well deserved. Congratulations to you all. Now, looking towards 2021, WAIPA and the World Bank Group embarked on a new journey to globally recognize IPAs for their hard work in advocating needed reforms that, as said, improve the investment ecosystem. Let me spend a few minutes here. We mean investment ecosystem as defined by investors. This is the broader environment for their investment projects. It includes every aspect that the investor needs to successfully enter, establish, operate, prosper, link, and expand in a country. It includes policies, regulations, and support institutions that are typically referred to as, in a group, as investment climate, business environment, business enabling environment, etc. But the ecosystem in the minds of the investors also includes talent or skills, infrastructure, support to industry or suppliers, among many others. We were inspired by listening to investors since 2017, about 4 years ago, and finding out that investors most appreciate IPA's efforts to improve or help improve the business environment, means that investment ecosystem in their minds. And indeed, the global survey of investors that we recently launched this year and the report that Christine mentioned showed that advocacy is the most valued service IPAs can provide. I don't know how many IPAs knew that, most likely very few, but it's very important that we now understand this situation. Investors see advocacy actions by IPAs as a service on their behalf. Maybe it's not as direct as we providing information directly to one investor or having a seminar or hosting a site visit for them. It is very indirect because you're acting on behalf of many investors, but they do see that as a very valuable service, the number one in the list. IPAs can effectively advocate as they are in daily contact with investors. All of you, you know gains and pains, and you know even how investors compare your location versus competing locations. Think of the great advantage IPAs have by identifying regulatory bottlenecks, policy failures, and other gaps that are impeding investment and that actually could be reformed for a better investment ecosystem. These meaningful insights can allow IPAs to prepare a well-substantiated analysis of the market and policy failures, of the gaps that are missing in the ecosystem, and even identify emerging opportunities, especially in the midst of the pandemic. They can provide this valuable feedback to policymakers. And as part of that, draft position papers, promote recommendations, do consultations that would improve the mindset of these stakeholders and eventually lead to reforms that improve the ecosystem for the benefit of many investors. Let me capitalize there, many. This is advocacy at its best. Now, policymakers in turn should appreciate, not always, but should appreciate this very valuable feedback that the IPAs can bring to them, because in a way, that's their door towards fostering private sector, generating faster economic growth, transformation, and then quality employment that every country in the world wants, and that is really badly needed now. In this sense, IPAs are an active connector between investors and policymakers and stakeholders at large. Now, the pandemic has only reinforced this importance of the connection between investors and policymakers by IPAs. Leading IPAs have been advocating and catalyzing reforms aiming at mitigating these bad effects on them and eventually help out of the crisis on a faster way. Now, this doesn't mean that IPAs become regulators, right? So don't misunderstand me. What we know, international best practice still shows that the most effective IPAs are not typically regulators. Division of functions and all these things actually makes for the best IPAs. What investors and we mean is that IPAs can effectively use advocacy to influence policymakers, regulators, and stakeholders at large. As I mentioned, maybe the port needs to be improved. Maybe the suppliers are not sufficiently strong and you need to raise their level, do a supplier development program, right, or advocate for that to happen, et cetera, et cetera. And take note, we say advocacy, not just policy advocacy, because we want to encompass all the aspects that the investors need beyond policy itself. Now, Christine already mentioned this, and it's very unfortunate that only 5% of the IPAs budgets are devoted to advocacy. Maybe it just takes a few good persons to do this. It's true. And maybe it's not as expensive as going, traveling around the world, etc. That's given. You need somebody who's good or a good team within the country. But then maybe that's overlooked, as we are saying since the beginning of this. The advocacy services have been perhaps left out by many agencies. Now, how do we change all this? We need to all together raise awareness. I'm saying raising awareness globally by WAIPA, by the World Bank Group, by United Nations, UNCTAD, OECD, etc. But within each country, yourselves, you need to also work with your constituencies to raise the awareness about this. About one, IPAs are valued by investors. And maybe some governments don't really know, and they don't think about that, and maybe they pull resources from the IPA to devote to other things. Research has confirmed it twice over the last 4 years that IPAs are valued by them. Second, raising awareness that investment promotion, or within the investment promotion community, us, investors really appreciate advocacy, #1 of the entire list. Did you know that? Third, governments should listen more to IPAs. And this is something that you can count on us, the World Bank Group, every time we meet with ministers, every time we meet with regulators or policymakers, we're putting that on the table, that IPAs have this wealth of information that they should listen to them. They are the voice of investors, especially now, and that would help with the faster recovery in your countries. And last but not least, fourth, we all need to recognize that IPAs do need to become better at advocacy by using data, improving their analytical and advocacy skills. This is something you learn. And now, these 2021 awards on strengthening IPA advocacy services seek to raise such levels of awareness and call to action, right? Because we're also evaluating that. Let me say, we're going to be recognizing, as mentioned before, that IPAs implemented effective advocacy services that led to the adoption of a reform or some reforms there that successfully improved the investment ecosystem. And hopefully we saw some action by investors. Either they remain in the country, they didn't leave, they expanded, and maybe you attracted some new. We also aim to have some peer-to-peer learning through events and technical notes that will be written from this. Now, specifically, Christine already mentioned the 3 aspects that we'll be measuring. Let me just give a little bit more detail here. Data collection, analysis and position papers, and then the lobbying and the follow-through efforts so that you can get to the reform. On the data collection, this shall include things like surveys, focus groups, broader consultations, all these systems, tools, instruments, so that you can directly and systematically listen to investors, not ad hoc. So that's the first. Second, we should also evaluate the analytical and reporting capacity to produce persuasive position papers, policy papers that move policymakers or stakeholders to action. And third, everybody knows a paper can collect dust in a corner unless you got somebody, a champion, steering the discussion. So third, we shall evaluate the way IPAs network, raise awareness on the issue and the importance of the reform, influence, follow through, consulted a little bit more, discussed, and then achieve the reform, because we all know it ain't easy. The reform will be evaluated as well on how it helped retain, attract, or expand investment, as I mentioned, for the benefit of investors as a whole. This is very important, or as a sector, a region, a group, but not for one single investor. That has to be clear, because that falls into the aftercare services that we all know, dealing with one investor and his or her issues. It's aftercare. We're talking advocacy, reforming for the benefit of many. Okay, and then we'll count reforms from January 2018 to November 2020, and we can discuss maybe December as well, all right, because we're launching in December. Now, bonus points for COVID and the difficulties during COVID. As we know, many of you have been advocating measures during these very difficult times to fast track those reforms and mitigate the effects of the pandemic on investors. And so they would be included in this version of the awards, and they would receive, those submissions would receive bonus points. Okay, so that's, I hope, a good news in the midst of this. Now, I have the real pleasure to introduce two of my best friends here, Dushan Thakur and Vanessa Gibson. Dushan Thakur has been already presented or introduced by Andreas. He is of Invest India, and we've been working with Dushan since many years. And Vanessa Gibson is a dear colleague, country mate of me, of Cindy, Costa Rica. And we worked together when we were at Cinde, so some years ago. So it's really, really a pleasure. I can only say great things about both Dushan and Vanessa, because as I mentioned, I've been having the pleasure to working with them on and off. And I can tell you from the deep in my heart that they are truly investment promotion champions in their respective countries. Each of them shall briefly present their case on how their well-known IPAs provided advocacy services that improve the investment ecosystem in their countries. So without further ado, Dushan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Armando. You're very kind. If you would allow, I'd like to just share my screen.
Do so.
Yeah. Okay. So do let me know as soon as it is visible.
It is coming up, yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. So maybe I'll take the next 5 to 6 minutes and take you through this very interesting work, where World Bank has been a wonderful partner for us. We've really learned, to do things on this particular front from them. But I'll be spending a little bit of time on the sub-nationals in our country and some work which we've been doing, in that front. Just to, bring out, so Invest India in its current avatar is hardly, 5 or 6 years old, whereas a number of sub-nationals have been around for maybe 2 to 3 decades. So, some of them have been very powerful. The overall fact that India is a federal structure where you have 28 different states, 9 union territories, and we can only be as successful as the sub-national IPAs. To give a seamless experience to investors, it's very important that, both the national, the sub-nationals understand each other and they're able to work in a very, seamless sort of a manner. It also is interesting to note that out of these 28 states, maybe around 7, 8 or 9 of them would be receiving the lion's share of investment. So it's fairly lopsided. That's one aspect. And as you get down into understanding this aspect, you'll see that there is huge variation in the investment promotion preparedness of these states for some of the states. A number of states out of these still do not have, their IPAs. And that's been, again, a very challenging thing for us. Like I mentioned, our success is as good as, their success. And that's where, having the IFC World Bank as a partner, we launched a project in 2017, which was a nationwide project on strategic assistance and guidance for the development of sub-national IPAs in our country. This was a 2-phased project. And in the first phase, we, understanding what they were, it's very difficult till you really don't do a detailed study of the sub-national IPAs. So that's where we launched a survey with the World Bank. And then, we did it around 8 specific areas, 8 pillars, and I'll reflect a little bit on this. So this was the first phase. And the main output which came out of this, the areas where we felt sub-nationals were really lacking is what became the base for the second phase. So just to, talk a little bit about the first phase, you can just see that there were 55 specific questions in 8 different pillars. And out of 28 sub-nationals, 21 states out of 28 participated in that. And there you see that, once we got the feedback on the surveys, we physically went into each of these states. We spent a day with them. The World Bank team accompanied us for some of these surveys, but it was really understanding how they do their stuff, where all are they lacking on. And that became the basis for us to, really get down into where were they doing really well and which were the areas where they needed to improve. And that's what, brought to us that where was the country in terms of, how prepared were they as far as, attracting investments were concerned. And, we could really clearly identify, let me just pick up a couple of examples. Aftercare is an area where everybody was completely lacking. That was one. A lot of IPAs, actually none of them had IPA strategies in place. They had too many sectors, going after 15, 20 sectors, each of them, and, then not having the correct sector propositions, not having relationship managers. not very focused targeting initiatives. So these were the sort of areas, and this became the the second phase which we launched. And this time it was a much more elaborate. We had 74 specific questions on 8 pillars. And instead of physical visits, we brought in an IT system. We made it a little more stringent. Each of them were supposed to upload specific proofs against every question which they gave in. And just to sort of talk about what sort of advocacy efforts that we have put in, there's been a whole lot of assessment workshops, understanding what they do. We've prepared national and subnational reports. So in the first phase, we did 21 reports for 21 states. We are currently authoring, Mitali, who's there in the audience right now, and me, we are together, along with one more of our colleagues, are writing 20 reports currently. Then we had these online systems. We did 3 national level capacity building workshops. Thank you, World Bank, for partnering in those, and almost 18, state capacity workshops. We brought in a whole lot of templates. We look at, for example, what is Cinde's Idea Island strategy, how they do it. And, we brought in a lot of, templates for SOPs, for strategy, and lobbying was the most important thing. We were going back to, let's say, the senior most level in a state, and we were telling them that, hey, I know you have maybe 5 people in your IPA, but ideally you need to really take it up. You need to hire more, get more expertise, get in people from the private sector, let them have enough money so that they can, get on a plane, go in and meet an investor. But, did it work? Just an example here. One of these states in the northeastern part, and we did an internal assessment. So what was earlier an emerging potential where the score was more in the 50 to 60%, we could see that in 8 months time they did get down into creation of a proper investment promotion agency. They did a good amount of work on the ease of doing business. And then, when we rated them, they were close to 75 to 80%. So we could see some improvements and overall impact of the reforms. 8 states came out with their IPA strategies. 6 states have done aftercare strategies. 17 states worked on, specific SOPs on different areas, receiving investors, answering to queries, handling delegations. 76 specific SOPs came in. And then, a whole lot of some of these other points mentioned, a number of IPAs have scaled up. Case in point, guidance, which is the IPA of Tamil Nadu, which is a state in the southern part. It used to have 5 people initially, and I believe now it is one of the leading IPAs in the country, and they're doing a fantastic job getting a lot of investments. They've got more than 50 people now, and they're hiring the right sort of people. A lot of work on website improvement, branding, targeting exercises, ICT usage. So, the state of Odisha has now brought in a investor relationship management system. Quickly, a minute on our learnings. The whole, the lobbying part, talking to the right levels, talking to the highest levels, that becomes very important. Getting policymakers and critical stakeholders on board is very critical. The experience and knowledge which, global experts, World Bank, IFC, and WAIPA later on have also brought in, they have been very useful for us. World Bank had done some similar work in 4 other countries, and we were able to learn a lot from that, and that became a base for our work. And then, having clear guidelines, templates, case studies, and frameworks. Those were some of the areas and things which I wanted to present. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dushyant, for this explanation. It was a huge effort, and it still is. And
Yes.
I commend you guys for taking this over and for you leading it personally. I also see Mitali
Yes,
joining, so she has been part of that. And so fantastic. Congratulations on that. It is definitely a huge and many reforms at individual states. And be on the lookout for the India case study, the Invest India case study that we're going to be publishing in a few months. Over to you, Vanessa, please. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and it's a great pleasure to join Mr. Thakur in terms of sharing some of our experience. As you said, Tung Armando, earlier, policy advocacy is really gaining more momentum, and particularly in this context. But just to give you an idea, obviously in the case of Costa Rica, such a small country, access to government could tend to be relatively easier in terms of proximity in working together. However, it's also very important from a policy advocacy perspective to understand the different levels of stakeholders that are key players within any effort that you're doing towards benefiting the investment climate. So I am part of a group that is called Investment Climate within CINDE, and we are proactively actually constantly trying to navigate around developing those capabilities and positioning CINDE as a key partner both for government and for our investors community. As you know, we are a not-for-profit organization, so we are not necessarily part of the government. So our efforts towards government starts every 4 years by building the trust about CINDE's journey for the last 30 years, the impact of foreign direct investment, and as well as introducing to the investor community all these good opportunities of working hand to hand with government. So we cannot understand well the landscape of what changes are needed towards improving the competitiveness of Costa Rica through investment climate improvement, case by case or issue by issue. But mostly when we are able to work with companies, what we normally do is actually have possibility to work not just with local operations, but also at corporate level. This is very important because sometimes it's very interesting even to contrast the need of companies that are actually related directly to their day-to-day operations, and then the global strategic perspective of the operations of working with executives at their corporate level. So with that in mind, we normally are serving as that liaison between companies and industries with government and other stakeholders. And we are always trying to communicate back and forth needs and opportunities. With that, actually, we had two great examples in the period between 2010 and 2018. I would say very significant challenges for the country, and from a policy advocacy perspective, we definitely had the opportunity to exercise the muscle. Our major tool, aside from the quality of the talent that we are promoting, is actually the incentives that we are able to promote for companies to establish. And at 2 points in time in this period, we had to make major modification of a law that was enacted back in the 80s. And as you know, probably, trying to review laws and keep the rule of law and the sense of stability for companies is really critical when you take into account that their incentive package were actually going to be scrutinized, reviewed, and adapt. So back in 2004, because of World Trade Organization's requirement, from the manufacturing perspective, we needed to make a major adjustment. And with that, we saw the opportunity to tackle other items within the incentive package and the incentive law, which help us to improve some of the competitiveness of the incentive package at that time. But we needed actually to work and to facilitate first, creating awareness of the need of why we need to actually go forward with this change for companies, because obviously they become very sensitive in terms of what could be the outcome of that transformation. But at the same time, we had to work with government, different levels of the government institutions, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Foreign Trade, and so on, to also kind of have a better understanding of the impact of those could consider major changes and even the minor ones that we were able to influence, but also to have a longer term perspective. It wasn't just to commit and to comply with a requirement from the World Trade Organization, but it also could have an impact on the long-term strategy of Costa Rica. So we went through there. It was very interesting. We had a lot of communication going back and forth, and we were able to communicate to also create awareness, but also to bring technical knowledge in terms of the different impacts that we needed to put on both sides. Later on, because of us being part of the FHTP of the OECD, and trying as well to keep up in terms of keeping the standards of Costa Rica free zone regime to what is expected under global standards, we had to adapt as well the free trade zone regime law to accommodate the requirements to guarantee under the BEPS principle and ensure the substance and transparency standards for service activities. this as well was a really nerve-wracking period, because services is today the major generator of new jobs and also investment in country. So we needed to be very sensitive as well to how much of this transformation needed to be communicated in a very transparent way, both to local and corporate level, for them to understand the process, but also to government in terms of how can we mitigate as much as possible the impact of these changes, and how we could take again another opportunity to make further improvements to the framework that we're offering. So this has been actually two great examples where we gain not just better understanding of policy advocacy and its impact on foreign direct investment itself, because actually we were impacting, as I said, the long-term strategy of the country, and we had actually to adapt much of our strategy to attract new investment based on these changes that we had. The negotiation and the coordination and working hand to hand as a liaison with both key players in this strategy has been very successful, in the sense of us gaining better understanding of how now we're able to propose the value proposition for the country. So I think this, from a perspective of working within the IPA itself, my colleague Pilar, she's leading the investment advisory department. She requires for us to actually present to her different options and improvement of the investment climate and the business climate of the country, in order for her now to attract the new type of investments and so on. So the free trade zone regime will be always considered an area of opportunity for us. And we're now even thinking beyond these transformations that we went through, how can we influence? And we're starting to actually educate the government regarding what's the new trends of investment flows and how they might require probably a new way of thinking about incentives and enabling factors to attract these investments. So this is what we have, experienced in these two cases, and more than happy to answer any question later. Thank you, Don. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And this is a great reminder of IPAs needing to constantly lobby for what their worth is, their value before their government. So thank you very much for also pointing that out. We have two great examples, and actually complex examples, of lobbying by the agency to either generate institutional reforms in a huge federation, India, or policy strategic incentives, regulatory, and other aspects that had to be reformed as a package to comply with World Trade Organization, in the case of CINDE Costa Rica. So these are great examples. But look, there's so many other things that you could also think about. And I know every country has been trying different things. I know from Costa Rica that they had skills development for getting to better IT certification, for language development in Colombia, for supporting industries around the world, bringing up the suppliers to the level that the investors need, et cetera, et cetera. So without further ado, let me just share the screen to have Alexandra, our colleague Alexandra Minsu, to present the last slide with the time frame, because most likely everybody is anxious about, okay, so how do we do this? How do we participate? So here's over to you, Alexandra.
Many thanks, Armando. And again, many thanks to our wonderful guest speakers and our panelists for the wonderful introduction, and also for the great examples they shared with us from their work and from their experience. And as you mentioned, we are really looking forward to having so many more great stories. And because we know that there is a lot of potential for having such stories, we're launching today a competition that we hope will be just the first edition of the many more editions to come. So this will be, as we thought about it, this will be a yearly based competition, and we will be every year presenting these awards under the auspices of the World Investment Conference. And I've already seen in the Q&A box that we've got interest and enthusiasm about the technical details of the competition. And my colleague Ahmed will take you through the actual digital platform that we created for this. We hope that our efforts made it as easy to use and as friendly to use as possible. So we hope you have a good experience with that. But before we get to that, a few important details we'd like to bring to your attention. So we're launching today the event, and we're hoping everyone will have the chance to prepare their submissions by the end of March next year. So the deadline for the submissions is the 31st of March 2021. And then we will take a bit of time, of course, as all these international competitions need time to process the application, obviously, and then to have the panel of judges analyze the submissions and identify those submissions that will be awarded. And we can only say that we have thought about involving in this process great minds from the organizations that are actively promoting the development of investment and the investment climate issues. And the panel of judges will select the best 3 advocacy efforts of the year, as well as an honorable mention. So these are the awards that we hope we will be announcing under the World Investment Conference that will take place next year. And without any further, I would actually mention one more thing. I think it's very important to know, given that we have a bit of a time constraint during this session, it will be very difficult to take a lot of questions. However, we are preparing a special session for Q&As in January. And it will give you the opportunity, obviously, before that, to check the platform, to check the webpage and the conditions to apply. And then in January, we can meet and discuss if you have any particular questions about the process or about the submissions. So thank you very much. Over to you, Ahmed.
Sandra, I'm sure all of you are waiting for this moment to actually see and witness how you can actually apply to this contest. So shortly, I will share my screen, and this should lead you to the actual application platform. My colleagues, can you please assure me that you are able to see the platform?
Yes.
Are you able to see? Okay.
Yes,
great.
we can see it.
So the platform is online on our website from now on, and shortly after this presentation, I will share the link in the chat box. And of course, you will receive the follow-up emails with the link and other details relevant to this application. The application platform consists of 4 sections. It's important before you click here how to apply that you carefully review the rest 3 section, as they will help you to provide relevant answers to the questions and that your application is actually successful. So before going to this section, how to apply, please review the section where you can find more information about competition, about conditions to apply, and of course, about the best practices in the field of advocacy. So once you reviewed carefully this section, it's time to apply actually. Before applying, we provided you the relevant definitions for the competition, such as what we consider for an IPA in context of this competition, what is the investment ecosystem, how we define advocacy, and which reforms are actually qualifying for this context. So please read these definitions very carefully before you proceed with the application process. Another important element is that before you click this button here, apply now, is to check the overview of the submission form by clicking this button. This can help you to prepare your answers as well as the relevant documents required for the successful submission. This document actually includes all the questions and documents that you are required to provide during the application. So once this is reviewed and you prepared your answers, you prepared the documents, then it's time to apply. And it's very simple. We just click this button, apply now, and it will lead us to the actual submission form. The submission form contains of 3 sections. The first section is introduction. The second section is the description of the ref form, and the third section is the description of advocacy tools. In the first section, you are required to provide the contact information of the person submitting the application. So I will mimic the actual application process. So I'm sure this will be more beneficial for you. So I will fill each field. These asterisks here mean that these fields are required, so you are not able to proceed to the further section without filling them. This here you need to provide the contact information of the IPA. Here, it's very important that when you see the question mark, that you actually hover over it, as it will pop up the instructions and the further guidelines how to answer the particular question. In this case, for this particular field is saying to us this field is required if the person submitting the application is different from the person representing the IPA. This means if these informations here are different from this, then these fields should be filled. Also, I forgot to mention that later, after submitting this application, you will receive the confirmation email, and this confirmation email will go on this email address. So this is very important to mention. In this case, I'm the contact person of this particular IPA, so I will fill these fields empty. So we can proceed with the next session, where we need to provide description of the reform. Here we will type the name of the reform. Here you can see that the maximum number of characters is 150, and you are not able to provide more, so pay attention to this. Again, don't forget to hover over these question marks that provide more information about the particular question and the guidelines how to actually answer these questions. Here is the uploading section of the documents. Keep in mind that in case you have more than one document, we advise you that you merge them into one PDF file. The maximum size of this PDF file is 25 megabytes. And we also encourage you that all the documents are provided in the English language, or that you share a link with us of the English translation if possible. So let's check whether we filled all required fields. Now we are at the final section 3. That's about the description of the advocacy tools. Don't forget again to check these question marks that provide you details about the particular questions. Some fields are required, some are not required. As you can see, these here questions are optional, so you may fill them or you may not. I will leave them for now empty. And we came to the end of the submission form. It's important now to mention that you are able to modify your answers by clicking the previous button. So you can go back, you can change your answers, or you can check whether you provided correct answers, etc. But once this button, submit button, is clicked, you're not able to edit it. So please make sure that before submitting this button, you are sure that you provided all the answers that you wanted actually. So I will click the submit button. The confirmation message will pop up. And also you should receive the confirmation email on the email that you provided with all the answers and the documents that you submitted during this application process. So that's all regarding this. Of course, in case you encounter any technical issue or anything similar, please feel free to contact us, and we will gladly help you, with everything. So that's it. Shortly, I will share the link of the application platform in the chat box, and you will receive, of course, the follow-up emails with the further details. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexander and Ahmed, for this useful presentation, how the platform works. And also thank you very much to Dushyant and Vanessa for the insightful cases. I can only echo what Armando said. We're very fortunate that two such successful IPAs joined us today for this launch and shared their insightful cases. But we're now turning to the end of the launch, and I would like to invite now Ivan Nimac to give his closing remarks. Ivan is Investment Policy and Promotion Global Lead for the World Bank Group, and please, Ivan, the floor is yours for the closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to all the speakers. Yes, it's my task to close with a few closing remarks. Excellent to see that we've kept to time. Very efficient. Thanks a lot. Look, I think the World Bank Group, we continue to support reforms all around the world. We work in about half the countries of the world, actually, to help identify barriers to private sector development. We talk to a lot of investors, foreign investors, domestic investors. We seek their direct feedback, and we add that feedback to what we learn from our other research and analytics that we do, and all of that feeds into support to governments to try to unblock these barriers and to try to help economies grow. Now, through this competition and other similar efforts with WAIPA, we support IPAs in developing their advocacy services in particular, so that they can act as the main connector between the investment community and policymakers. And actual fact, best practice IPAs have advocacy as a core part of their mandate. And in these circumstances, these pandemic circumstances for which we're all going, obviously advocacy is important, not just for facilitation and for attraction of new investment, but most importantly also for the retention of existing investment, so that to ensure that governments are focusing on the investors that are there and present in the country, as well as those that they hope to attract. So WAIPA and the World Bank Group, we jointly invite you to bring your advocacy story forward and share your experiences in improving your location's investment climate and ecosystem in broader or in sectoral terms. Do participate also in learning from each other through the competition platform that we are creating, hoping that with your support it will become a point of reference for IPA advocacy work going forward. Ultimately, we aim at improving the investment ecosystem at large in order to retain, expand and attract investment that can generate economic transformation and create more and better jobs in your countries. And we look forward to your participation. Thank you for your attendance of this launch. And as Alexandra said, we'll be providing more information after the holiday period sometime in January, so stay tuned. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Bye.
Have a great day. Bye.